Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.
You can watch this lesson real time on Television Jamaica's YouTube channel or One Spot Media. We also are live on Music 99 and GoJamaica.com. If you have questions on today's subject, you can send them into Television Jamaica's Facebook page or Instagram at television_Jamaica. Today's lesson is on Caribbean studies. We are going to be focusing on social justice. I am Melissa Beckford Simpson, and I am your teacher for today. JUSTIS. We want justice. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound familiar to you? If you are a Jamaican, then it should sound familiar, because this is often what our placards look like when we are demonstrating in the streets that we want justice. And we want the Prime Minister to come now and to come and fix the road. And we want the Prime Minister to come now and fix the water and all that is going wrong. And we want nobody less than the Prime Minister. Yes, you guessed it. We're looking today at the topic social justice. All right? So the goal of the lesson today is to explore the issue of social justice in the Caribbean in all its facets, in the context of development. Remember now, everything to do with Module 3, we're looking at it in the context of development. Okay, so what are our objectives today? We want to define the term social justice. We want to explain the historical underpinnings that underscore the emergence of the concept of social justice. We want to assess the breaches to social justice in different facets of Caribbean life. And we also want to determine the extent to which these breaches have negatively impacted the quest for development in Caribbean states. Okay, so let's move on. What then is social justice? It is an understanding that all people who live in a society have or are entitled to equal access to basic resources, right? And this is regardless of race, ethnicity or religion, class, age, sex, sexual orientation, you name it, regardless of any of those factors. All persons who live within a society are entitled equally to all of its resources. That is the concept of social justice. Okay, now, when we're talking about that, we want to look at that in the context of Caribbean society. We will recall that the Caribbean is a mixture, what we call a melting pot of different people, right? So we have mainly people of African descent, but we also have people of Indian descent, Chinese descent, who came to the West Indies in the 1840s and 50s to work to replace the newly freed peoples in the Caribbean. We have pockets of indigenous peoples in Belize and Suriname and Guyana and so on. And so we are a melting pot of different peoples with different ideas and cultures and so on. But it does not matter where we originate from. We all occupy the Caribbean space, first as a Caribbean region and then as individual countries within the Caribbean. All right? So therefore, it goes for everybody. So we talk about, equal access to everything that's in the society. Why would this not happen? What would cause this not to happen? The fact is that we have vulnerable groups within the Caribbean, right? Women have been a vulnerable group at different times in our history. Men, too. Notice I put men there. In the context of what we call marginalization. You may be familiar with the idea of the male marginalization theory, which talks about with the increased access of women to higher education, that the men are sidelined and therefore marginalized. It's a very controversial issue, but yes, it is there. And then we have indigenous groupings in places like Belize, as I mentioned before. We have persons with disabilities. They are part of our society. So, things like ramps in public spaces and those kinds of things must be done. We have ethnic and religious groups, and this kind of discrimination we call creedism. right? And then we have children and the elderly, and you put all of that into one grouping that we call ageism. And then, of course, you have LGBT groupings who feel that they are vulnerable in the Caribbean, and more so in the Caribbean than probably some other places. All right, so the idea of social justice is predicated on some words, right? So there are generally some terms that are used when you're talking about justice or the lack thereof. So you have prejudice, discrimination, stereotypes, marginalization, abuse. All of these are words that we will see coming out when we're talking about social justice. All right? So, prejudice, what is that? It is essentially a kind of mindset, a preconceived mindset about someone, right? It's usually negative. And then you have stereotypes. It's connected to that. What is a stereotype? A stereotype goes for a grouping of people, not just one individual. So that prejudice moves beyond just a conceived notion to a kind of idea that this is how these groupings of people are. All right? So we can think about indigenous groupings, for example, right? And what they are normally considered as. And then we have discrimination, and that's a broader word that is used to look at acts of prejudice that are normally given against groupings of people, and abuse, right? Which takes it a little bit further, and there are legal situations concerned with that. Now, how do we classify social justice in the Caribbean? When we're talking about social justice, we have to talk about two important words. First word, rights. All right? So it's predicated on these buzzwords, rights. What are rights? And it's simply the idea that humans are entitled to certain things just by virtue of being human and living in a certain society. Natural rights are connected to that, and it says that they are God-given. You're talking about things like life and liberty. Just because you're a human being, God gave you these, you know? And then you have civil and political rights. How well are people allowed to participate in the affairs of the country, such as voting and so on? And then you have economic and social rights. Equal access to the resources of the country so that people can live in a state of dignity. And when we're talking about these things, we are looking at things like education and employment. Responsibilities now, right? So with every right, there is a responsibility. So while you have these things that you should be entitled to by virtue of living in this society, you still have responsibilities. So your rights are tempered by what it is that you are required to do, right? Especially as it relates to other people. Now let's move on just a little bit from that. Other terms that relate when we are classifying social justice. Fairness, equal treatment. We spoke about this just before. Equal treatment for everybody. All right? And what do we mean by this? An example, the justice system. Whether or not you are poor and can afford a lawyer of your own, you can afford to pay all that money, you should be entitled to the same offerings of the justice system as anybody else who is of a different class and is able to pay their millions of dollars for a good lawyer, right? So the justice system should not discriminate because of your class. Welfare, let's look at that word. We're talking about special programs that are implemented or established by a government to ensure that no grouping is left out. All right, so within a society, everybody would obviously not be on the same page. So you want to find these kinds of programs or implement these kinds of programs. We're talking about things like relief programs. PATH, for example, Program of Advancement Through Health and Education. And that is for the vulnerable groups in our society, those who are not able to afford it. The CARE, that one is very new, and that has been issued in light of COVID-19. And we saw yesterday on the news where, you know, how many people are accessing these care packages because they have been made vulnerable because of their lack, because of COVID-19. They may have lost their job or something like that. All right? Now, what is the historical underpinning of social justice in the Caribbean? Why do we need to talk about this? The fact is that in the Caribbean, we have a history of social injustice. We do. Let's think think about it. Remember all those words we did in the beginning of the syllabus? Conquest, enslavement, colonialism, plantation system, and resistance. Don't leave that one out. Resistance. Remember my placard a while ago. JUSTIS, we want justice. Do you think that is a coincidence? No. It's almost as if it's embedded in our psyche as a grouping of people that we're always resisting, even when there's no need to resist, and we perhaps just used to need to use a different channel to get what we need done. All right? So we have a case in point here, the Morant Bay Rebellion of 1865. All Sam Sharp and his people wanted to do was to just bring to the attention of the governor the issues, the social and economic issues they were facing. They were granted their freedom, but they were not granted any way to live, no land, no nothing. And so they just wanted justice, social justice. We know what came out of that. The governor refused to see them, and the result of it was the Morant Bay Rebellion, where almost 500 people were just summarily hanged and thrown in a mass grave. So we have this culture of resistance. So we have struggled as Caribbean people to make this concept that we call social justice a reality. Yes. How is this borne out now? We spoke about demonstrations before, right? In Jamaican, we call it block roading. Yes, block roading, that is our word for it. Block roading. So everything, we block the road, right? We get some old tire, and we get, at one point in St. Thomas, I remember a couple of years ago, even animals, cows, were used to block the road. Old cars, whatever it is, we are blocking the road, and we call it block roading. Right? Because we want justice. We want what is rightfully ours. All right? And it is also borne out in political rivalry and factionism that we have had, not just in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean. We have had factionism. All right? Why do we have factionism? Because we've had these groupings of political parties who have, over time, basically helped to divide the society, not just in Jamaica. In Trinidad, we have two different political groupings, one primarily for the descendants of black people, and another for the groupings of Indians who came to the Caribbean, right? We've had it in many different Caribbean countries. Levels of crime. It is borne out in the levels of crime in the Caribbean. We also have the levels of poverty that show that social justice, we are still struggling to achieve that in the Caribbean. All right, so there we have it. You know, tire burning in the road and all of that. That is how we demonstrate in the Caribbean, right? And political factionism, PNP versus JLP. And we will recall the year 1980, which is on record as our bloodiest year, when, you know, there were lots of killings in the streets because of the same political factionism. And of course, our very own Bob Marley, at his One Love concert, tried to put the pieces together. We are still struggling, by the way. All right, so where do we get this idea of social justice? What grounds social justice in the psyche of the Caribbean, or the concept and idea of it? We spoke about this at the last class. From the Enlightenment, from the 1700s, the idea of natural rights came up, right? Natural rights. By virtue of being human, by virtue of being born, you are entitled to life and liberty. All right? Then we have the UN Charter of Rights and Freedoms coming out of World War II after 1945 and so on. The constitution of our country was predicated on these Charter of Rights, and therefore it also gives us these ideas of social justice. The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child is specific to the child. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is specific to persons with disabilities. And there are other charters too that are specific to ethnic groups, religious groups, and that kind of thing. All right? Now, let us look at this statement here. I keep repeating this because it is the basis of Caribbean development. Ensuring citizens have continued access to freedom is important for development. These freedoms include personal security, the rule of law, freedom of expression, political participation, and equal opportunity. Therefore, to ensure development, the 4 pillars of HDP must be achieved. You will recall the human development paradigm. Let's look back at it. The first pillar on the human development paradigm is equity. We also have productivity and empowerment and sustainability. But in this case, for this topic, we are focusing on the pillar called equity. All right? Now, there can be no development of any country without human development. This has to be factored into what we are doing. However, there are other economic indicators too that can help us to look at the idea of whether or not we are achieving equity in the Caribbean. So let's look at this indicator called the Gini coefficient. This measures the levels of inequality in a country on a scale of 1 to 100. So if you're at 0, then that means you are perfect, you're at perfect equality. Everybody has equal access to resources and things are going well in this country. If you're at 100, you are at perfect inequality, which means that different groupings in the society are not feeling as if the resources are being distributed equitably or that they are being treated fairly in this country. All right? Now, if you are somewhere in the middle, then you can figure out how it goes. How many persons within a particular society are able to access and afford the resources to be able to live comfortably and with dignity in the Caribbean? These are questions that it raises. Now, you want to look a little bit at these graphs that are here. They give an indication of where we are as Caribbean people in terms of equity with the Gini coefficient. All right? Now, this graph lists not just Caribbean countries, but also Latin American countries. So it gives you Bolivia and so on. But Jamaica is at number 3 on the first one. And Jamaica is at 60. By the way, this was at 2010. This graph is from 2010. And then further down, we have the Dominican Republic, somewhere at about 55. But there are Caribbean countries that are ranking lower than the 50 mark. Obviously, if you're at the 50 mark, you are halfway there in terms of equity in your country. All right? So we move on from there now. I want to just examine very, very briefly some of the breaches of social justice that have occurred in the Caribbean. All right? So let's just remind ourselves of what they are. We have creedism, ageism, gender inequality, sexism, which, ties in there, extrajudicial killings / police brutality, classism, domestic violence, violence against women. Yes, there are 2 different things because domestic violence does not always include women. Sometimes it includes men and it also includes children. Everybody within the domestic space. All right? And then you have discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. And this list is not exhaustive. There are many other kinds of breaches that we can think of in terms of, social justice or the lack thereof in the Caribbean. So the real question that we want to ask, as we look at these breaches, the real question we want to ask is, where are we as Caribbean countries? Can we truly say that we are on the path to development when we have so many instances of these breaches taking place? And can we examine the Caribbean as a whole, or do we need to look at each Caribbean country to determine the extent to which this particular Caribbean country is, somewhere near equal in terms of giving everybody, all groupings within the society, some kind of access? And we may need to look at it individually because not all Caribbean countries have the same kinds of issues dealing with. Belize and Suriname and Guyana that have large pockets of indigenous groupings fighting over land and, their rights, so to speak. Then we have different issues coming out there. We do not have that issue in Jamaica, but we have other issues. Let's look at gender inequality. What are the buzzwords that come under gender inequality there? We have patriarchy. What is that? A society that is based on the male's domination or male dominating most everything. right? Do we still have a patriarchal society? To what extent is that changing? Let's think about that. The gendered workplace, yes? We know that the statistics in terms of higher education in the Caribbean are higher for females, right? Every year we hear numbers that sound, that go somewhere near 60-40 in favor of females, 70-30 graduating from the universities. Yet, we have these issues continuing all the time. But when we go to the workplace, it's not necessarily bearing that out. Look at the parliament, for example. What is the ratio of male to female who sits in our parliament? When we have so many women who have achieved higher education. In the workplace, we still have this issue in the Caribbean where even though we have more qualified women in the workplace, we still have at the very top, at the CEO level, we still have mostly males. So breaking the glass ceiling, women are still trying to break that glass ceiling. Sexual harassment, it comes into the workplace, but not just in the workplace, in other areas of life as well. You know, you're just walking along on the street and it's a norm for us. Yo, baby, wagwan. And men are touching you all over and they feel they have a right to do so. And you know, it's just a part of us. We are going so far. You're going too tighty. You know, that kind of thing. And we don't see it as anything, but it's sexual harassment, right? And then we have domestic violence. Okay, let's look at that just a little bit. Now, we know that usually when we hear of domestic violence, we're thinking about mainly the females in the home. But statistics across the Caribbean prove that, contrary to what we believe, children are have the highest rate of domestic violence. Because we don't generally look at it that way. We usually look at it in terms of females, you know. And then we also have an issue where there's a high rate of males being abused in domestic violence. But of course, we don't have a culture of reporting that kind of thing. Perhaps if you go to report it, you will be ridiculed, you know, because of these kinds of patriarchal ideas and sexist ideas that we have in our country, not just in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean, right? So we have these issues in terms of gender inequality, and then it is perpetuated throughout the society. All right, let's move on to another one, right? Let us look at police brutality, a sore point for us in the Caribbean. Police brutality and extrajudicial killings are attached to that. Usually when we have these issues, we're talking about inner city communities. Almost nightly, if not nightly, at least once per week, there is an issue on the news. Somebody from the inner city are complaining, then just kill him, he never do nothing. And they just, you know, and then we're left always wondering. And then, of course, the police give a different side of the issue. They're saying that they were attacked, you know, and they met with gunfire and they responded, and this is the result. And we don't know what to believe. We don't know what is really happening. And it is a sore issue. In fact, Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago have always been listed and named as countries with these issues by human rights groupings, right? And such as Amnesty International and Jamaicans for Justice, which is local, they're always talking about these kinds of issues, and the rate of these things are too high. So Jamaica is infamous for our statistics on these things. Police killings are high. Let's look, for example, at the Tivoli incursion situation of May 2010. All right? We did have a situation there where the police were met with what we call bad man in Jamaica, right? In search of one bad man. And the result of that, according to the official statistics, is that there were over 70 persons who were killed in this incursion that lasted a couple of days. And the entire country was under a state of emergency because of that. Following that, there was an inquiry, a commission of inquiry. And of course, there was some compensation made to the to the persons who live in this West Kingston division, not just in Tivoli, but in neighboring areas as well. And so we have this continuing issue. That is the last big one that we have had. But as I said, we have it almost daily, almost nightly. We have this issue of there being a clash between the police and the citizens. And this stems from a lack of trust of the police. The people don't trust the police, and the police know what they know. They have their intelligence, and so they're going in to uphold the law. That's what they're going in to do. But yet we continue to have these issues in the Caribbean, and the statistics are too high. They have been trending down somewhat, but they're still too high. So when we look at police brutality, and people are just, killed like that, and we don't know exactly what the issue is, we are led to ask the question, do we really have social justice? Are they just discriminated against, stereotyped to say that because they live in the inner city, they are all bad people, and they all know where the guns are, and they are all connected to the bad people? And that is a general idea. And you hear the citizens of these communities having this kind of cry. Let's look at another breach of social justice, a little bit different now. Religious, ethnic discrimination, what we call creedism. And we want to take a case in point because we have a real case in point in Jamaica, right? The Rastafari grouping. They are generally discriminated against. They are said to be unkempt because they do not necessarily shave or, they grow their hair. They're said to be unruly, right? And even in terms of work, they are not said to have the corporate look. So it is sometimes very difficult for companies to hire them, to work on the front page. And so they have to cut their hair and that kind of thing because they're unkempt. They're stereotyped. They're persecuted as being other. They're different. They do not subscribe to our standards of grooming, right? Then, as a matter of fact, they don't subscribe to our standards of anything. They have their own standards and they keep them, right? We will recall the 1963 Rastafari persecution by the state, the Coral Gardens incident, as we call it, where a number of them were killed. They were hunted down and killed. Grant you, it was a response to an attack on the state, but they were hunted down and beaten, some were killed, and it has been a sore point in our society. Now, recently, following that incident, they have been lobbying, and recently they were granted a pardon in the parliament by the Prime Minister for the atrocity that was done on them. But apart from this one incident, are they now accepted into mainstream? In fact, I think maybe they are more accepted overseas than they are accepted in their own country. So we have this issue still of the Rastafari being persecuted and discriminated against as an issue of social justice in the Caribbean. So we have explored some of the issues. Of course, we are not able to explore all of them today because there are so many more that we could explore. But we will continue, and you can do your additional reading for some of these issues. Now, if you have any questions on what we've done so far, you can send them in on our various platforms, and I will see if I can answer in the final segment. When we come back, we answer your questions and wrap up. Stay with us. School's not out. School is not out.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much.
Inferior.
The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, along with TVJ, present Schools Not Out, CSEC and CAPE lessons live Mondays to Fridays from 9 a.m. to 12 noon, with weekly Schools Not Out tutorial sessions on Saturdays from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Schools Not Out, live CSEC and CAPE lessons here on TVJ.
First of Ethiopia. Now, these words I chose to start this segment because they speak to forms of discrimination taking place, and the concept of social justice is being borne out through this song. So when you think of the words that he says, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior. There's no social justice going on there. So he's saying that it should be finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. And then further in the song, he goes on to talk about so many other issues. Now, Bob Marley was not necessarily referring to the issues in Jamaica per se. He was referring necessarily to perhaps the apartheid system in South Africa. But it does not matter because the same ideas of social justice are important and are being borne out in the song. And what he continues to say is that there will always be war as long as people are not feeling equal. As long as people are feeling that the resources are not for them. They believe that, you know, if they go to the health center or the hospital, if they don't have certain kinds of money or dress a certain way, then they will not be looked at. You know, these are the issues. And it is a real issue for us in the Caribbean and especially for Jamaicans. Constantly people say, if I did somebody else, then they would have looked after me and they would do this and they would do that. People face these issues when they try to access the social and economic amenities that the country has to offer. Even in education, there is a divide, and we've been talking about this educational divide for the past couple of days in terms of access to certain resources. Some schools, right, are not able to have the same kind of access in this remote distance learning kind of situation, while some are able to, because you go to a certain school with a certain dynamic. And so the idea of justice, equitably distributing the resources and having equal access to all that the country has to offer, all that the countries of the Caribbean has to offer, it remains an elusive kind of dream. All right? So we want to move on, though, from this point, and we want to look at how to use our brain with this kind of topic, right? So we want to move on, shift gears just a little bit from social justice, from the concepts of social justice and the meanings and so on. And we want to use our brain just a little bit in this segment before we have to go. All right? Now, I know that many of you are still working on those SBAs and you're not coming up to the grade that you want it to come up to. It is my hope that you are somewhere near the final stages. So if you are near the final stages, you want to be looking at the conclusions, the limitations, and the recommendations. Last week, we gave you some more tips as they relate to the discussion of findings. All right? So let's get those brains active now. All right, so the conclusions and limitations. What is the conclusion? And the conclusion is worth 2 marks. It is one paragraph that sums up the main ideas and points related to the research. One paragraph. So you don't need to give any details here. You would have given all of your details in your analysis and your discussion and so on. You just want to summarize what is it that is coming out of this research. You want to be careful and be concise, but at the same time, you don't want to lose the idea. You don't want to lose the whole essence of what you are doing for the SBA. All right? So that's worth 2 marks. If you are able to come up with a good conclusion, that's 2 marks. Limitations. Simply, what are the challenges that you faced in conducting the research? And as I love to say, saying that you gave out the questionnaires yesterday and collected them today and you didn't get all of them is not necessarily a challenge. That would mean that is something that you didn't do correctly, right? So a legitimate challenge that you faced in conducting your research. That is what you want to look at, all right? Was it that you could not find enough secondary resources to do what you needed to do with this research and to ground your research? Because that's what your sources are. Your secondary sources are there to ground your research, to give it some kind of legitimacy. Was it that you were unable to find enough of these resources? Then that is a legitimate challenge. And there are many other things that you could come up with as a challenge in terms of doing your research. All right. Now, could we look at the recommendations just a little bit before we go? The candidates are expected to present at least 2 recommendations. Now, the recommendations are worth 4 marks. It does not mean that you are to present necessarily 4 recommendations. It means that if you have 2 well-written and well-ventilated recommendations, then you are well on your way to receiving those 4 marks, right? Now, these recommendations need to be very, very, very specific, all right? So what is it? And it's good to lay your recommendation. So you could begin with a recommendation on the local level, and then you could move on to a recommendation on the national level. What is it that you want the government or a government agency to do, all right? But then you can also look at what do you want the community to do in which you're conducting your research, all right? So then, this is what we need to look at when we're looking at the recommendations. You need to look at what. All of these questions must be answered, What, when, where, how, why, and who, right? So what is the exact recommendation? You may suggest a program. You may come up with your own program, or you can come up with a completely new program. You may look at, for example, the program PATH. Do you think PATH is sufficient? Do you think that is something that you need to strengthen? The government needs to strengthen PATH program and give it more access so that more people can come in. More people can have access. Remember, we're talking about social justice just now, and it comes right in, right? The no user fee policy in hospitals, for example, if that's what you're looking at. Is it working? What can be done differently in order to improve this program? Would you throw out this program and put in another program? All right, so that is the what. When? When would you implement this? If you want to have parenting sessions in your community, for example, in the community centers, when? On a Monday night at 6 p.m., parents would come, right? Where you would talk about having it in the community centers. How will this be done? And who will be doing it? Would you be asking guidance counselors from the schools? Or will you be asking the National Parenting Support Commission to come in and to conduct these sessions in the communities? Is that how you want to do it? Yes, so you want to pay attention to how and what and where and why and who and all of those things in terms of doing your recommendations. All right? Now, today we don't have much time left, so we will not be able to go into the multiple choice challenge. But for the topic of social justice, there may be only 1 or 2 questions sometimes on an entire exam multiple choice paper. However, that does not mean you do not need to know. Remember now, the only form of this exam you'll be doing is multiple choice. And so you could very well have more questions on social justice. So do your reading. That's all today for Caribbean Studies. We have been looking at social justice. I hope you grasped most of the points we discussed. You can catch a repeat of today's lesson on JNN today at 4 p.m. in the Schools Not Out highlights on Saturday between 1 and 4 p.m. right here on TVJ. It also will be on video on demand on One Spot Media. Until next time, I am Melissa Beckford Simpson. Pleasant viewing. Stay safe and remember to wash those hands. Midday News is up next.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching. Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you.
Get moving! Home workout series with Jamaica Moves.
Jamaica move, mobilize, flexercise. Jamaica move, Jamaica move, Jamaica move, mobilize, flexercise. Come on, take a selfie. Breathe.
Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8:35 a.m.
Hi! We haven't left you out. It's Get Moving, kids.
Wall Street above. We're moving.
Home workout series with Jamaica Moves. Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays at 2 p.m. on TVJ.
Get moving! Home workout series with Jamaica Moves.
Jamaica.